Welcome to Voice of the People, the television program brought to you by members of AFL-CIO unions all over the state. I'm Chuck Depper, president of the AFL-CIO, and with me here is Jerry Payne, secretary-treasurer. I think we have an interesting program with a lot of variety this week for you. We'll have a report on the Community Services Conference that we had just recently in Kokomo, Indiana. We'll talk a little bit about a lawsuit that the AFL-CIO filed on voter registration against the state of Indiana and the pending settlement there. And we'll have a phone call from a viewer that I think you'll find really interesting and we're going to enjoy, I believe, Jerry, responding to. But first, we have a report from a rally held in Noblesville, Indiana by the United Rubber Workers. As you know, we had those folks on this program a couple of weeks back and their struggles with Firestone up there. So let's go to that report right now.
A rally in support of the United Rubber Workers Local 138 was held in Noblesville on Saturday, December 3rd. Union members from throughout Indiana gathered on the courthouse square to hear from union leaders from the United Rubber Workers, the United Auto Workers, the Central Labor Council, and president of Local 138, Charles Gibson. From the courthouse, the group marched through the streets of Noblesville to Local 138's Union Hall, located next to the Firestone plant. The strike against Bridgestone Firestone is a nationwide strike that came about following the purchase of the company by a Japanese-owned company, who then came to the bargaining table with contract proposals that are obviously designed to attempt to break the union and destroy virtually all of the gains the workers have negotiated over the years. Just as one example of the approach the new foreign owners have taken, one of their contract proposals is to take back some of the paid holidays, and one of the holidays they want back is Labor Day. As the strike approaches 200 days, it is now the longest strike in the history of the United Rubber Workers.
5-day week, 8-hour day, paid sick leave, higher wages, health insurance, overtime pay, pensions, safer working conditions, paid holidays, job security, paid vacations, maternity leave. The proceeding has been brought to you by the men and women of the unions of the AFL-CIO who won these benefits at the bargaining table and set the standard for all working Americans.
Welcome back. As we said earlier, we want to talk a little bit about a settlement we had with the state of Indiana over a lawsuit that we initiated, Jerry, against the state about motor voter.
Yeah, Chuck, a lot of our viewers out there probably have no idea what motor voter is. Why don't you explain that to them?
Well, the federal government, Congress in Washington, passed new legislation requiring there to be changes in the rights for people to register in order to be eligible to vote in federal elections, and required the states to meet those minimum standards. Things like being able to register by mail, being able to go into an unemployment office, any office where people would go on a regular basis, a voter registration office, a place where you buy your license branches, unemployment offices, those kind of things. Make it much more accessible for people who are disabled so that they could be eligible to vote, because we know, as you pointed out earlier in our discussion, over 1 million people in Indiana are not even eligible to vote because they're not registered. And the state went along, the legislature met last year and never passed any enabling legislation to put this into effect. And the deadline was January 1 of 1995 coming up. And so when they didn't do that, as you know, our board decided and gave us authority to go ahead and file a suit against the state. As a result of that lawsuit, it went to federal court. The federal judge took jurisdiction and said, yes, we were right, and ordered the parties to sit down and negotiate a settlement.
Well, I think that's important, since we have a lot of our own members that, through their per capita dollars, pay for this show, and they've also paid for the time that we spent on that lawsuit, is to make it clear to them that what we were trying to do as the AFL-CIO representing workers throughout the state was to make sure that Indiana complied with the federal law, which, as a result of last year's legislature, they failed to do.
Just didn't do it because of politics.
Right.
Yeah, and we're interested as a union. We want folks registered and eligible to vote. Now, whether or not they do, we encourage them to vote, but they ought to have the right to vote.
Right.
And in Indiana, our laws are just terrible. I mean, we know of voter registration offices that open at 10 o'clock in the morning and close at 2:30 in the afternoon. People who punch a time clock at 7 in the morning and get off at 3:30 can't register to vote. And our system depends too much on politicians to go around door to door to do registration, and if they don't happen to like the way that your precinct votes, they don't go in there and register.
One part that was not part of this settlement that's to be worked out, the way I understand it in the legislature, is the battle over whether or not they're going to establish a uniform statewide computerized
Voter file.
Right. What do you think is going to happen with that?
Well, the judge retained jurisdiction, but I think it was clear that he wanted some system set up, and so we'll be following that.
So I think it's safe to tell our viewers out there that if the legislature doesn't act in a proper manner, that we'll take this back to court on their behalf.
Judge retained restrictions. This is not over. Okay. Well, that's what we think. If you have a comment about this lawsuit or voter registration, like to comment on anything in this program, call us on 1-800-433-8423. We care what you think, and we'll try to respond. We'll be right back after this break.
American workers are calling for action on the issues. We care about making the tax system fair.
The tax base has just been shifted from the federal government to the states and back to the people who work hardest.
And so it's simply a matter of taking it out of one pocket and putting it into another.
The problem of the answers that we get now is that it benefits a very small group of people and puts a very large group of people at risk.
Let's fight for the issues. Let's care for the future.
Well, as you know, as you've watched this program before, the AFL-CIO is involved in a lot of programs. One of them is community services. Recently, the Community Services Group, that's a group who meet to talk about how to bring services to our members in need off the job, held a statewide conference in Kokomo, Indiana. And here's Dan Miller with a review of that conference.
The Indiana State AFL-CIO 28th Annual Community Services Conference was held in Kokomo, Indiana, November 13th through 17th, 1994. Kokomo recently received the Model City Award for Community Service presented by the National AFL-CIO. Green Lewis, director of the AFL-CIO Department of Community Services, was the featured speaker for the opening banquet of the conference. We had the opportunity to talk briefly with Mr. Lewis.
Green Lewis, welcome to Indiana.
Yeah, Chuck, glad to be here.
Listen, tell us what you do at the AFL-CIO.
Well, Chuck, I'm now working with the Community Service Department. I'm the recent appointed Community Service Director of the AFL-CIO. And of course, we do all we can to make sure that people understand that we are more than a collective bargaining agency, that we are also concerned about the full development of all working Americans, and we do all that we can to make sure that the life of the workers are just a little bit better.
Tell me, how did unions and why did unions ever get involved in community service activities in the beginning?
Well, Chuck, I think I guess we can safely say that we got involved to make sure that all the people in this country would have an opportunity to the finer things in life. You know, those of us who think alike, those of us who have same thoughts, have to give of ourselves and our time to make sure that those who have less is also protected. And so when the chips are down and when situations aren't what we would like for them to be, we collectively work together with all sane-thinking people to make things happen.
We have pretty formal relationships with both United Way and Red Cross. Can you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, we got a relationship with Red Cross and the United Way that goes back over 50 years. Matter of fact, just about as old as you and I. And of course, that relationship started out of necessity. You know, during the World War, there were widows and children left back here that needed help. And of course, the guys overseas need a little help. And of course, we came together on the United Givers Fund and those different kinds of things. And we started sharing our riches and sharing our ideas and resources. And so we've maintained that relationship over the years. Even though that some of the guys who was in the war said that it was tough about that nickel for the donut.
Yes.
We tell them that we are beyond the nickel for the donut and that we still feel that we should work very close with the United Way and the American Red Cross because they are very much interested in the salvation of all people.
You're here for the State's Community Services Conference that we put on every year. I think you're the guest speaker this evening, is that correct?
Yeah, and I'm delighted. I'm delighted that you and your committee and the state committee and the liaisons would invite me here. I'm very happy to be here, and I hope that I can say something that's inspirational and something that would be of value to them to carry on into the next few months or year.
Tell me, this past Tuesday we had an election, and things have sort of changed in Washington. How's that going to affect what you do, what community service activities we might be involved in the future? Do you see any effect?
Well, I say stay the course. I don't see much change. I know that people needing people has been around forever and a day. We're going to continue to try to help people help themselves, and we hope that they would stay the course and not become disenchanted, and understand that we understand that we've been down before, and we're going to be down some more. We just hope that the people that now have the reins understand the plight of the country, and that all people have a right to a good life in America.
We sure are glad to have been able to spend some time with you. I want to welcome you to Indiana, and I look forward to hearing from you at the Community Service Banquet.
Yeah, thanks, Chuck. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you.
Always a pleasure to be around Indiana and around you.
Thank you.
You're an inspiration.
Thank you.
Yes.
I appreciate that.
During his speech at the opening banquet, Mr. Lewis hit several themes, pointing out to the delegates that our focus should be to reinvent the future, not redesign the past, and that the best way to predict the future is to design it. He emphasized the importance of coming together across racial lines, religious lines, and political lines to bring America together, not tear it apart. The new delegate orientation was led by George McCullough, Community Services Liaison, United Way of Wabash Valley. There were about 55 delegates attending their first Community Services Conference. In this session, they are introduced to the importance and range of community service that union representatives make available to the members of their unions and others in the community. Following welcoming remarks from Artie Scruggs, president of the Howard Tipton Central Labor Council, the conference opened Monday morning, the 14th, with a presentation from Gail Deppert, executive director of Read, Indiana, an adult literacy program. She presented an historical perspective of the importance of literacy, explaining that people function at different levels of literacy. According to a survey conducted in Indiana, 1 in 7 adults function at a level where the best they can do is to determine the expiration date on their driver's license. Ms. Deppert explained how people hide their inability to read and how they have learned to get by in society. She emphasized that literacy has nothing to do with intelligence, just the opportunity to learn how to read. Lynn Minnick, executive director of the Labor Institute for Training, presented a program on lifelong learning. He focused on 4 main points. Participation is different than cooperation. Knowledge is power. Participating is bargaining, and always involve the workers in decisions. He also explained the role of the AFL-CIO and the Labor Institute for Training in providing training for displaced workers. Jerry Payne, Secretary-Treasurer of the Indiana State AFL-CIO, brought the delegates up to date on the current political situation in Indiana and the legislative agenda for the upcoming session of the Indiana General Assembly. He went into detail concerning the current situation in the areas of unemployment compensation and workers' compensation. On Tuesday, the 15th, The session opened with Dr. Danae Bixler, Director of the Communicable Disease Division, Indiana Department of Health. The focus of her presentation was on communicable disease in the workplace, how diseases are transmitted, common diseases in the workplace, testing procedures, and probabilities of transmission. Dr. Bixler was followed by Brian Brossi, Executive Director, the Governor's Council for Physical Fitness and Sports. He talked about the importance of workplace wellness. The major points he brought out were taking responsibility for your own health, health factors that we can't control like heredity, environment, sex, and age, and those factors that we can control like diet, exercise, rest, stress, and smoking and alcohol consumption. Rick Edwards, the state coordinator for the Americans with Disabilities Act, provided the delegates with some insights into the ADA. He explained the 5 different titles of the ADA and the different areas that the titles cover. After discussing what is a reasonable accommodation according to the Americans with Disabilities Act, he explained that the ADA is a tool to provide equal opportunity to all people with a disability. Alden Taylor, Public Affairs Director of the Indiana State Emergency Management Agency, opened the Wednesday session with a presentation concerning disaster preparedness in Indiana. He described the different disaster situation threats to Indiana that range from earthquakes and floods to plane crashes. Mr. Taylor explained the training that is provided to agencies on how to respond to disasters and how the different agencies like the National Guard or even the Department of Education coordinate in times of emergency. He was followed by Dan Robita, who described the structure of the Federal Emergency Management Agency. Mr. Robita took the delegates through the process of how the federal agency assesses a disaster. He also described how the federal agency works in tandem with the state and the authority and responsibilities of the Disaster Field Office. Following these descriptions of the activities of the federal and state emergency management agencies was Stan Gordon, a labor participation associate with the National Office of the American Red Cross. He pointed out to the delegates that the first chairman of the American Red Cross was Samuel Gompers. Mr. Gordon explained the role of the Red Cross in the community and organized labor's involvement across the spectrum of Red Cross activities. As an example, he described how many unions donate the use of their union halls as relief centers in times of emergency. Catherine Newman, coordinator for the American Red Cross, then led the delegates through the Red Cross Introduction to Basic Disaster Action course. Because of their attendance in this section of the conference, the delegates are now certified to attend further disaster service training for the Red Cross. This introductory course consists of a series of video and group participation sessions that takes the participant through the steps of a disaster victim. The afternoon session offered the delegates a choice of breakout sessions dealing with diverse subjects. One breakout segment was presented by Pat Hunter of St. Vincent Hospice Services. She explained the programs and services that are available to families in need of assistance during the very trying time of facing a terminal illness. Susan Maxson of the Bridge Counseling led a highly attended session on family matters and the problems associated with single-parent families and blended families. Those attending learned in 2/3 of all married couple families, both parents work. Particular attention was drawn to the needs and problems of children when their parents divorce, and then to place on top of that already existing stress the strain of blending 2 separate families into one group. A third breakout session was presented by Dr. Flora Williams from the Department of Consumer Science and Retailing at Purdue University. She made a presentation on funeral planning. She explained the need for pre-planning a funeral from the economic and family consumer point of approach. All 3 breakout sessions were well received, and many suggested expanding these subjects into full sessions in following conferences. The day closed with a program led by Cheryl Graham, Community Service Liaison from Kokomo, and Nancy McCormick, the AFL-CIO Community Services Liaison and Regional Director of the United Way of America. Using actual case studies and group participation, the delegates were introduced to community service crisis management by learning how a victim of an emergency or crisis feels they are treated when trying to deal with the various agencies and programs they must move through in order to receive assistance. The stigmas and embarrassment that many people have with being in need was brought forth in trying to deal with people in the areas of crisis intervention and referral management. One of the lessons brought forth was to think past the obvious, and that counselors must deal with both the seen and unseen problems of people in crisis. The 1995 Community Service Conference will be held in Muncie, Indiana. If you would like to know more about any of the programs mentioned in this report, call the Indiana State AFL-CIO at 317-632-9147 or call and leave us a message at 1-800-433-8423.
As promised, we had a phone call from a UAW retiree, and we said we'd respond, so let's take that call right now.
Yeah, I'm a retired UAW worker in Fisher Body in Marion, and just let me tell you, saw the interview with Andy Jacobs, and he was complaining about conservatives on radio and television and not having a balance. Let me tell you that all the media in this country is liberal, and all they give you is a left-wing communist slant. And you'll find that most working people voted Republican because they want this welfare mess cleaned up. And we don't have people like Rush Limbaugh give you a fair balance of information and not slanted and tell you the truth. And the people bought it. People that pay taxes in any union or working man are tired of these freeloading Democrats and welfare recipients that don't vote, don't work, don't do anything but suck up the paycheck. When I started the Fisher Body in the 50s, they took about 10% of my paycheck. Now they take 50% if I was still working. The kids got to put up with that. You should understand that. And the union movement will be dead unless they understand fair trade and honesty. The 30s is over with.
Well, thanks, Johnny Bob. We appreciate that call. You got something you want to say, Jerry?
I sure do, and I want to start off with that Johnny Bob issue, that this guy uses that stereotype to refer to one's heritage or educational background. What this viewer really is a highly misinformed viewer out there that fails to take the Republican line of personal responsibility to search out the facts on any issue that he's talking about here. He points out that he's a UAW retired member. That means he's drawing Social Security. And what we want to draw the line between is Social Security, a government handout. Sure it is. It's an entitlement program that a lot of the Republican viewers say it is. We say that it's a program that we pay for through the tax system,
right,
and that's how we get those benefits. So the union point of view is, no, it's not an entitlement program, that it is a program bought and paid for by the workers in this country and their employers. Sometimes when you point your finger, it comes right back at you, and that's what this guy's done, because